Thank you, and thank you very much, Adrian, for that presentation. I actually thought it was, it certainly helps with the subject matter that I have to talk about. And this quote, which is from John Cage, is probably the quote that I use most when I'm talking to my clients. And I spend a lot of my time talking to my clients as a brand consultant, trying to help them not spend their money on branding programs that essentially do just this. Basically to have nothing to say and say it. Because I would probably argue that not only within the arts, but in most branding programs, I would say probably 70 to 80% of the cases, this is exactly what happens, is that a lot of money is spent with very little result for it. And I think our assets are in too short a supply to continue with that, and we need to think differently. And when I look at organisations, and when we started working with Louise Heron and Sydney Opera House regarding the One Voice project for them, she said to me, please don't let this be another vanity project. And certainly that's our commitment. And I think it's incredibly important that when we are undertaking branding programs, that we come with a very fresh perspective to actually the role that they can play. Because I think one of the things that actually provides so much cynicism around these programs are the conventions that are associated with this kind of work. And I would say that when I look at most organisations who are facing significant challenges, it isn't the external effects that are actually the things that are the problem. It's the inability for the organisation to respond to those effects. It's the challenge that leadership has, it's the challenge that the culture has, and the mental models that the leadership and the culture within that organisation is imbued, is that what limits them to actually break out of the conventional thinking and to innovate and to confront the problems that they face. And this is a lot of the work that we have to look at when we are talking to cultural institutions, is that how do we actually reconsider the history and heritage of what we have done with a fresh set of eyes. I mean, it's not only the the arts world and galleries and museums, it's the same in every category. This is consumer packaged goods world, and this is a whole bunch of juice bottles. It's not from an art exhibition in any way, shape or form. And you can see the convention here, and consumer packaged goods is very much in a commoditised world now, is that brands, particularly when it comes to this sort of category, are largely irrelevant. And what organisations have done is once they used to build brands, now build commodities. And what they've done through branding is actually create commodities, because essentially what you can see here are exactly the same products, and the labelling is almost identical. What you have is a brand, you have an orange, as if we didn't know what was in the bottle already, and the name of the product. And that is essentially it. And so you wonder how on earth the professional market is doing this and actually getting paid for this stuff. Because it seems to be the kind of stuff that just happens time and time again. And it's not only consumer packaged goods, it's in professional services. If you go and have a look at your website of an accountant or a law firm, you've got people looking stupidly at computer screens. You've got people happily in meetings. And you know, if you actually want to show success, you've got people going up escalators. And if you want to really sort of knock them out of the ballpark, you can have collaboration and on escalators by shaking hands. And then you can come to, I guess, one of our early clients was the Griffin Theatre Company, which is a very small, almost backstreet theatre in King's Cross, who is actually very successful. But they came to us and said, look, we couldn't get any attribution for the work that we're doing. And it's really great work as a new writing theatre. And you can see, even simply through simple things like the posters, is that there is no attribution of the Griffin Theatre Company behind perhaps a logo you may see here, because they followed the convention of the performing arts world, is that the poster should be all about the performing arts, and really the presenter has nothing to do with it. And I think it's a very significant failing in terms of the ability to be able to show the purpose of an organisation. And so what about museums? And I'm sure there are a few people from the audience now that I'm going to reference here in terms of their organisations, and please sort of accept my commentary as constructive. Because I think it's important to be able to illuminate, and I'm going to talk about the way language is used and the way symbols are used, because I think they certainly represent the thinking that sits behind how organisations think, and I think that's really my point. Firstly, often when I walk through galleries and museums, what I often feel like I would like to do, if I was capable of doing it, was actually tip them upside down and tip all their content out. And what you're typically left with is this anonymity, essentially this receptacle. And what I would like organisations to do is actually just that, is to remove their artworks. And then to bring everybody who works there into that space and to go, how am I actually going to come to work and produce the greatness that goes on here? Because we lean very heavily on the greatness of the artist to actually make our institutions great. But really it should be the people and the leaders of these institutions that make our art great. And I think by actually removing, I guess, the things that we actually hold dear, we then have to rely on ourselves to actually achieve that. I see that, in recent years there have been a large number of, I guess, rebranding programs that organisations have done, and these are well-regarded organisations and have been highly, commented on in terms of the quality of their rebranding. The problem is, for me, is that they largely follow a contemporary design fashion. And whilst they may be very good museums and galleries, what they are is beholden to that fashion and the convention that exists now, and they don't actually reflect anything about the nature of that organisation, its point of view, the texture, its people, and its real purpose. And this extends to the inevitable mission statement. And each of these mission statements, you could say, are perfectly crafted, and they tell us something exactly about what the organisation is trying to achieve. But looking beyond that, essentially what you see is a ritualised language that is part of, I think, the gallery speak or the art speak of our world. And it doesn't simply exist here. You can go to most mission statements and you'll see very similar things. And what you see is sort of a reductiveness in terms of our language, which is really unfortunate. And business speak comprises about 2,000 words out of a language in English that's about 2 million. We have more words that we can use to actually create the texture of what we're trying to achieve. And so with those vision statements, we see language around preservation, inclusiveness, enrichment, the past, the present and the future, etc. And whilst these are worthwhile things, we don't really get a sense of these organisations about who they are. And I think it's incredibly important that we consider this, not only in the context of branding, but the way that we actually grab people and engage them. We can use, and again relying on great architects and great buildings to actually help support our institutions, and if you have enough money, that's a fantastic thing to be able to do. However, again, it gets us away from actually getting to the heart of what do we as people, and particularly people within these organisations, think and feel about the artwork and what contribution we can truly make. We can also use the artist as the brand, and then often I think to myself, which brand are we actually building? Are we building the brand of the artist or actually building the brand of the organisation? And whilst there's a symbiotic relationship here, I truly believe that too often it is the artist and not enough of the institution. And often you see, and this is another one of those funny conventions, as you can see this little logo in the bottom left-hand corner there. And for me, it's kind of a very much a symptomatic thing of most branding work. It is often seen as, I need to get myself a logo, some guidelines, and then I can stick it down the bottom left-hand corner of a poster. And that is essentially the process, and that's kind of a mechanistic process that the thinking goes through. And again, to me, that is a very wasteful activity. And even great institutions such as the Pompidou falls within that trap. Again, if you actually remove that logo, it could be from anywhere in the world in terms of each of those posters. One of the answers to that problem is make the logo bigger, isn't it? And MoMA does that very well, and they're able to connect, I guess, all the great things that they do with a very, very strong, representation of themselves. But to me, all of this effort often reminds me of the step and repeat pattern that I think so insightfully Warhol actually presented through his Campbell soup cans. He was an extraordinary brand consultant. I think he understood branding better than I think most marketing people do. This is a representation of the industrialisation of branding and marketing. It is a perspective of branding as it existed in the 1950s at the sort of height of the industrial era. We are now in the 21st century, and this kind of branding that we think of in terms of step and repeat patterns and consistency of branding is not really the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about. And I often talk about the fact that it's not about consistency, because consistency gets you boring. It should be about coherence. It should be coherence of story that people understand, but a variety and excitement to be able to drive, I think, an interesting narrative. And so for me, I guess the point is, let's look beyond the art and the buildings or any government act or charter, because I don't believe these are the things that should be limiting us in terms of the greatness of the institutions we should be creating. It's where are the living, breathing heart of the museum? Who are the people who work there every day? What are they thinking and feeling? What are their goals? Why should the world really care about these places? Why can't we actually put that on display? Because simply the implicit worthiness of what we do isn't enough, and we shouldn't assume that. We need to work very hard at actually defining what is the character of our institutions and using our brands to actually represent that effectively above and beyond the art that we present. And so we face extraordinarily challenging times in terms of, I guess, what we do in galleries. Support has probably gotten harder and harder since 2008. Costs increasing, competition, substitutes, alternatives, our legacies that keep us beholden. And the image you see there is the Osaka Maritime Museum, which opened in 2000 and closed 2013. An extraordinary architectural achievement wasn't enough to save it, which is an incredibly sort of sad thing. But for us, and for me, should we be optimistic? Absolutely. And the thing that I always ask of organisations when I work with them is, should our brands not be as exciting, engaging, interesting, innovative, dramatic, exciting and arresting as the exhibitions that we bring to the world? And you can change the world from brand to organisations. We should absolutely be, and we should be front and centre. And that's one of the reasons why I think Mona is such an extraordinary achievement, because it certainly lives up to this. My touchstone from 14 years ago when this work was done is Tate. It's, again, still remains to me an extraordinary achievement. I can't imagine most organisations would have accepted a blurry logo, because the textbooks tell you that legibility is important, but this was at the heart of essentially what they were trying to achieve. They had a very clear ambition to not simply compete on a local level but with the world, to focus on from collections to experiences, to actually deliver a fresh perspective about what modern art was and to bring people in. Their mantra was to look again and to think again, and then to set about actually bringing that to life at everything that they did. From actually the way that they introduced, the blurred boundaries between their brand and the artwork. And this was at the time the most important and certainly one of the most visited exhibitions at the Liverpool Gallery, and done with a high degree of, I guess, simplicity and thought. That they set about not simply thinking of brand as a communications activity, but the idea of what they wanted to achieve is something that to bind the entire organisation at every touch point. From the extraordinary experiences that you're actually able to see, from the ability to ask people to look again and think again about what they are seeing and reframing their exhibitions, to actually engaging new generations, to be able to use digital technology to extend and ask people different questions about the exhibitions and allow them to participate, even through to the very small amount of detail. And if you can't read that there, that's a fire extinguisher under which has said, "This is not art." Please. And I think for me, that's the sign of an organisation that knows itself and is happy to put itself on display. David Walsh has been attributed from actually making this comment, the subversive adult Disneyland is what he wanted Mona to be. There is more content in those three words than I think all the vision statements that I've actually put up today. Because you get a sense of the intention, you get a sense of the ambition. This is not showmanship, this is leadership. You see this in other organisations as well, in performing arts. The English National Ballet talks about being authentically superhuman in what they do. This isn't simply about the nutcracker for the 500th time. This is about an organisation that wants to lay itself bare, and it talks about itself in its language in a way that is honest and original. They talk about the fact that they're at war with gravity to capture the poetry from air. We do not exist to embalm traditions, we exist to cherish them and then to create more. We are neither cultured nor barbarian, brain nor brawn. We are human, full of lust and adventure. We are yours and we are you. And as a consequence of that kind of natural, original language, you get the sense of an organisation that is living and breathing and actually presenting something original. Similarly, to come back to Little Griffin Theatre Company, they decided that as language is key to them, they actually brought their brand forward. And they actually use language as a key piece to actually tie everything that they do together. This is an organisation that has grown, its funding has increased, its audiences have increased, its subscriptions have increased at a time where many competitors and other organisations similar to them have not done so well. And it's not a choice of increasing the budget, it was a choice of actually the things they chose to do. Doesn't cost any more to make up your mind in a different way. And as a result, they achieved success. So to conclude with some final thoughts, to have something to say and to say it, for me it is very much around opening our eyes to the world and having a point of view about it. What's right and what's wrong, and how do we put that on display? How do we actually articulate that with honesty and originality and not simply conform to the conventions to which our expertise often drives us? And then lastly, using that vision, that point of view to create a goal that helps bind everything. It's not an easy thing to do. There'd be more great institutions if they could actually achieve it, but the hard work pays off. And if we can actually bind ourselves in an original point of view, we'll not only be showing art in terms of what we put on the walls, but the art of actually creating extraordinary institutions that will live forever and ever. Thank you.